Jim Fote had some hair. Like, even for the 70s, he was just a man with hair. It's a mop. It's clearly from another time, as are his glasses. It's not that modern players don't wear glasses. No one is going out on the field with a set of these frames. And players like Jim Fote don't exist anymore either. Fote played 129 domestic one-dayers. He made 1,352 runs with a top score of 73 not out. He averaged 15. If you're waiting for his bowling record, there is none. He never bowled. He was a professional batsman who played for 8 seasons and didn't make runs. Oh, and he averaged 18 in first-class cricket, so there's no, they played him in this because they already had him on contract. Jim Fote made no runs and did so for 220 professional cricket games. And the Jim Fote story gets even weirder. After a slow start where he didn't average 10 in either form of cricket in his first year, he actually finally worked out batting a bit in the end and averaged a respectable 30 in his last 2 years of first-class cricket. And then he was fired and he never played again. And if you're like, wow, it was another era back then and he was only playing for Gloucestershire and it was the 70s, cricket was so different. Here's a few of the guys he played with. Mike Proctor, Zahir Abbas, Dave Graney and Brian Breen. Fote stood out then. He was a cult figure, and not in the way that we throw the term around now. He was something that people actually obsessed over. There was a fan club. That isn't normal for cricketers, especially, guys who can't make any runs. But that's not even the weirdest thing about Fote. One of his fan club members named a cellular metabolism after him. There is someone out there that now has, the Fotes. Sachin Tendulkar gets things named after him. Not guys like Jim Fote. At this point, you're probably screaming, why did people love Jim Fote? It couldn't have just been the hair and the glasses, although it was partially the hair and the glasses. It's quite simple. I've held back one thing from you. Fote was seen as such a good fielder that Gloucestershire kept him on their books. And imagine how good a fielder you'd need to be to overcome an average of 15, like some kind of bionic version of John T. Rhodes with octopus tentacles. They say his run out of Tony Greig won Gloucestershire a Gillette Cup final, and it was that skill which made him a pro cricketer and part of the scientific lexicon. Jim Fote was the complete package. It's just that none of that package included bowling or batting. It was all hair, glasses, and fielding. So why am I talking about Jim Fote? Well, I got to thinking that in a T20 squad, you don't often use your last local player that much. And in a squad of 16 people, you could probably afford to have one great fielder. And if Fote was good enough at cover to overcome 3 career 50s in 101 innings, maybe he would have been quite handy in T20. Not as a batsman. I think the dude proved that wasn't his thing. But pick him up as your 16th man and field him in all the most important positions when other players are injured. You could actually hire a beefy hitter and get him to pull a hamstring every game and use Fote in his place. And once I thought about Fote, it led me to think about how a bunch of old cricketers would have played T20. And no, not the obvious olden day guys. This mob would have been fine. And no, not the ones you're thinking of either, the ODI guys. They would have worked it out beautifully. But I was more interested in exactly what kind of player the far more dull, forgotten or just weird guys could have been. We know many of the players who played in the crossover eras often didn't take ODI or later T20 cricket that seriously. Who can forget Sunil Gavaskar's stoic 36 not out from 174 balls in a one-day international? Now, there are going to be a lot of people who think that no matter the money, these players were such red ball specialists that they would never have played T20. And this reminds me of the time I met a young writer and she told me that she hand-wrote all of her work because that is what Shakespeare did. I nodded and then said, yeah, but if he was coming through now, he'd probably use a laptop, right? And the idea that these old guys wouldn't have chased the money is, nonsense. Victor Trumper basically went on strike for one tour, and Larry Constantine played for the West Indies to get a pro deal in England, and those were two of the most pure of the pure. And let's look at Sonny for a moment. He opened the batting for India from 1974 to 1987 in ODI cricket, and he wasn't that bad, and it was probably worth it for him to keep getting paid for each one-dayer. So even the bloke who once protested the format mid-innings was good at it. So my 11 is part fantasy, but also based on modern T20 roles and trends and just weird things that come into my mind. Welcome to my dull, weird T20 historical 11. I would love to see Jeff Boycott putting his all into T20 cricket. It's clear he was built to be patient, but he was a really good player. He wasn't just boring and selfish. He worked out mystery bowlers, he did everything he could to make runs, and I'm sure he would be an above average opening batsman. Obviously, he would be the sort of guy who gets to 30 or 15 in the power play, only to slow down just after to protect his average a bit. But I think he'd make himself good enough that he played in all the leagues. I'm not sure he could ever be free enough to really dominate white ball cricket, but a solid pair of hands from a pro you could trust. Also, if he knew there was more cash on hand, I think he'd bowl a bit too. And he's not the only one. Really good batsmen through history have sometimes been ambivalent about bowling. And having toured with England recently, I now see Joe Root practicing his carom and knuckleballs over and over again in the nets. It's now worth cash money to bowl, and Boycott liked cash money. That's why he went on the Rebel Tour to South Africa. Sorry, but I'm about to say man-cad. If this triggers you into some kind of self-serving rage, that's your own fault for not understanding that batsmen can be run out if they leave the crease when the ball is live. But let's look at Vinu Man-cad for a minute, who rightfully will always be linked to running out the cheating Bill Brown twice. But what is forgotten is that Vinu Man-cad could play. He opened the batting and bowling for India once. Do you know who does that? Under 14 cricketers, and pretty much almost no one else. Man-cad was a steady bat who occasionally made double centuries, but he was a quality bowler, taking 162 test wickets at 32. He was a genuine all-rounder, but not someone that we classify as one, but what we really mean is he bowls the overs between 70 and 80. He's good enough to be on this list, which is full of the best all-rounders our game has known, and Irfan Pathan. So Man-cad could bowl quality left-arm spin.
He was thought to be as good as any left-arm finger spinner in his time, and he once bowled left-arm wrist spin. And my guess is, as a T20 player, he would have found more use for that.
As a batsman, he was known for his patience, but he once hit a six at Lord's so massive that they talked about it for years. He was the sort of batsman that would play any role that he was asked of. I need him to open the bowling, come back later, and bowl an over of wrist spin, and then occasionally whack balls out of the ground. Batting at number 4 is a terrible thing to do if you want to have pretty batting figures. But if you want to make a lot of money and travel the world, being a top-level number 4 is a lucrative place to play. It also takes single-mindedness and the ability to adapt to many situations. Turner was known as being quite frail and thin-looking, but he once made 300 runs in a day and he could play pretty much every shot that ever existed. He averaged 47 in ODIs, so we know he had some white ball game, and he had the ability to score fast all around the wicket, which is really what a number 4 needs to do. Before Glenn Turner turned up, New Zealand cricketers were amateurs. They enjoyed the game, but they weren't particularly good at it. Turner was different. He took the game seriously. He was like a tennis player working alone to better himself, and he rebuilt his technique to make it good enough to end up with 100 first-class hundreds. When Turner made that landmark, New Zealand as a nation only had 76 test centuries, of which he had the equal highest of 7. He could have made a lot more, but he didn't really respect the authorities in New Zealand and their amateur nonsense, meaning that he missed out on 6 years of test cricket, all while smashing the ball everywhere in county cricket. That, my friend, is a freelance cricketer, even if we didn't say things like that then. These days, he would have left New Zealand cricket and just gone from league to league cashing in. I need to fit a wicketkeeper in soon, but this is T20. So I'm going to take a very part-time wicketkeeper, slightly because he can do other things. In this case, I'm picking one of the most all-round players in the history of the game. Richard Austin is not a well-known player, but that's because he never got to play much, because he chose not 1 but 2 Rebel Leagues, first signing up with Kerry Packer's World Series cricket, before going to play cricket in South Africa in the 80s. So even before we go into what he could do on a cricket field, I think it's pretty clear that this was a guy who was willing to put his paycheck over his patriotism. Of course, when Packer signed him for $20,000, he was getting $74 a game for the West Indies, and he was offered $100,000 by the SA Rebels. Either way, he'd certainly be up for the T20 money. So Austin was primarily a normal all-rounder. He opened the batting in first-class cricket and usually bowled seam, and he did both to pretty good levels. He also once took 12 wickets in a first-class match bowling spin. And then during World Series cricket, he became the limited overs wicketkeeper for the West Indies side. I mean, he could actually kind of do it all, but we never saw it. Partly because the West Indies team was so strong, he probably would never have played much for them anyway. And as a fringe West Indian player like him, to make any kind of money, he had to take those rebel offers. Even if you were morally against what he did in South Africa, if Richard Austin was playing these days, he'd be in every league, batting middle order, bowling seam in England, spinning the PSL, and keeping wicket when his team needed it. It's a miracle that none of these T20 team owners around the world have picked themselves to play yet. And I'm not talking about for the major leagues, that would be crazy. But further down the chain, you can see, and I have worked for, some truly weird owners, and surely they, Or maybe their chosen sons could slip into a lineup for a chance to prove that they could have been something if they hadn't spent all their youth modeling Gucci glasses on Instagram or hoovering up Charlie. And there are modern precedents here. Anurag Thakur played a first-class match in 2000 after not playing any top-level cricket since he represented them at underage level 7 years prior. He did take 2 wickets in the first innings, but perhaps it was a bit more clear in the second innings that he shouldn't have played. Oh, and old rich guys used to do this all the time. Entire cricket teams were invented around guys who couldn't play but would pay.
But the Maharaj Kumar of Vijay Nagaram did it in tests.
And yes, Vizzy playing tests was every bit as wonderful as you'd think. In 3, he averaged 8 as a specialist batsman. He's supposed to have tried to bribe one player to run out another. And there is this photo from the tour. Have you been looking at this already? Let's take a moment together. That wicketkeeper is Les Ames. Les Ames was the first great wicketkeeper batsman. He averaged 40 in tests as a wicketkeeper, meaning he made 25% more runs than his nearest keeper. The bowler, who you can't see, is Titch Freeman. He took 3,776 first-class wickets. And sandwiched between these two incredible players is a man who appears to have walked on the field assuming there was a free lunch being served. Look how he's standing. No cricketer stands like this. And why on earth is he that far down the wicket? Was he attempting a single before the ball was bowled? And the ball's only just hit the stumps. We can tell that because the bail is still moving. And yet here he is, in the least athletic looking position possible. This is a man who has lost his car keys, not an international sportsman. And this motherfucker is doing all this with a fucking cravat on. Anyway, clearly he was a terrible egomaniac who embarrassed Indian cricket. So he'd be an ideal T20 franchise owner. Trevor Bailey played 61 test matches while never truly being a frontline batsman or bowler. He wasn't just a bits and pieces player, he was the gold standard bits and pieces player. He took 2 wickets a test and batted every position from 1 through to 9. If England needed something, he had a go at it. He wasn't great at any of it. Oh, and he was famous for being one of the most boring, slow, patient, turgid, whatever word you want to use, batsmen of all time. Generally, all-rounders like Bailey play for developing nations, or they don't really play much at all. For me, all test all-rounders fall somewhere on the Pringle-Botham continuum. They're either Botham, and they're good enough at one skill, or maybe even both, to be a proper all-rounder, or the Pringle. Very talented cricketers, but who don't have one banker test cricket skill. But they keep getting picked because, they're all-rounders. But that's test cricket. In white ball cricket, with our unnecessary fifth bowler restrictions, bits and pieces all-rounders are everywhere. And often they get paid good money to not quite be good enough to bat or bowl. But they do both okay. I think Trevor Bailey is their totem. There are other important facets to Bailey though. He was a great fielder, and he was known for bowling defensively. But when you look at him as a T20 player, he was dour with the bat, like mega dour. And while he might have come around a little bit, I'm still not sure where you would bat him in the order. And while he could bowl defensively, the fact he was a part-timer in tests makes me wonder if he'd get through his 4 overs regularly. So he's kind of nothing. And in that way, it makes him a perfect T20 all-rounder to be picked in every league. The ability to spin the ball both ways is very valuable in T20, hence all those leggies. But I thought I'd look for something a bit more creative in my spinner, adding just a touch of mystery. Don Gleeson was not the first mystery spinner, nor the best. That was Jack Iverson, who played in 5 tests, averaged 15 with the ball, and left us with this, kaiju hand pitcher. Oh, and also, he inspired Gleeson, who copied Iverson's technique. Gleeson was never as good, but he was clearly more interested in sticking around than Iverson. The problem was in tests you only had to wait on his bad balls and milk him. But the thing about test cricket is you get to face someone a lot while you're defending. You learn how they spin the ball and you wait for the bad deliveries. In T20 it would have been far different, what with all the slogging. And because we've seen it with other two-way spinners. Here are 2 that really struggled in tests but became world Big Daddy Supremes in T20 cricket. Oh, and Gleeson did actually play 5 white ball games. It's not a lot and they weren't always of good quality, but I wonder how he... Oh my god. I think this dude was just born too early. And he might have got worked out like he did in Test cricket. But in T20 cricket, you don't face the same players over and over again. And even if you do, there just aren't that many balls. He could have played for a good few years and made a lot of money before anyone worked out how to hit him. By deciding earlier that Alan Davidson was too obvious. And he was. He could hit sixes and swing the ball. I really limited the amount of left armers in the pool. Because pre-Wasim, there basically weren't any. This is the highest wicket takers for left arm seam before Wasim made his debut. It's a wasteland. They basically didn't exist then, but now you can't have a T20 team without a left arm seamer. I'm pretty sure it's against the law. Richard Kalinge was a hero for New Zealand when they didn't have many. Kirsten Gavry could bowl pace and spin, and he wasn't the worst with the bat. And Goddard is a real all-rounder, with a quality record, but I also just put in Trevor Bailey, and you never double Trevor. I was looking for a bit more firepower, so I've gone with Bill Vose. If you're good enough for bodyline, you can bowl 4 overs quick stuff for me. He was 6'4", which was quite tall for the time. There is a belief that bowlers who can get extra bounce, and Vose was reportedly one of those, are really handy at the start of T20 games, when batsmen quite often have to swing across the line and the new ball bounces just that little bit more. His bodyline partner Larwood probably would have been more effective at the end with his slingy short action, but I wanted new ball wickets with the left arm, so that's why I picked Vose over Larwood. Honestly, I think people have forgotten how good Lance Gibbs was. And I'm not even talking about the fact that his name was actually Lancelot, and this is one of the best photos in cricket history. When he retired, he did so with the most wickets in Test history, despite playing at a time when people were phasing out spinners, and to be honest, his team, the West Indies, would kind of phase out spinners completely straight after him. And I know that people who turn the ball one way aren't great T20 prospects now, but off-spin can still be hard to get away. And if you're like Gibbs and have freakish long fingers, spin the ball massively and get bounce, that causes a lot of troubles out there. And good off-spin still just works. And I'm not talking about the spin it both way guys, but there are plenty of guys out there who bowl normal off-spin and have a really good record. Gibbs wasn't an ordinary off-spinner. He was absolutely outstanding, and you could see how that would work well for him. Also, he went it under 2 runs and over in tests. He was frugal before they paid you lots of money for that. Fazal Mahmood was a wicket taker who didn't go for runs. And yes, he was also super cool, and one of the many cricketers to be the heir of Brill Cream. But you need to look past the hair and casual Siggy. He was the first bowler to take 12 wicket hauls against 4 countries. In the first 7 wins of Pakistan's Test life, he took 65 wickets. He took 40% of Pakistan's wickets when he played. No country has ever started Test cricket with a weapon anywhere near as good. When Fazal retired, he had more than double the wickets of any other Pakistani bowler. Oh, and he did all this while going at barely more than 2 and over and averaging 24. And there were all those bags of wickets I talked about. That's what I want from him, bags of wickets. Because when Fazal took wickets, his team won. That seems like a pretty cool skill for T20 cricket. I'm pretty happy with my team so far. I've got a lot of bowling options, even my keeper bowls. I have a weak middle order and too many openers, 3 obvious new ball bowlers, and so the team is now as shabby and mismanaged as most franchise teams tend to be. But by now you might have noticed that we have every spot in the lineup taken except for the number 3. So let's get this out of the way. You can't have a fantasy franchise cricket team and not pick the biggest franchise star ever. In 1871, Grace scored 10 first-class hundreds. The rest of cricket in England, I'm talking county, university, gentlemen versus players, and what other nonsense games had first-class status at Summer, 52 of them in all, produced only 7 more. He didn't outscore other batsmen, he outscored cricket. He played a draw shot through his legs, so he was open to innovation. And he bowled. He took 2,809 wickets at 18. Now accounting for how bad the other batsmen were of his time, that's still not a bad record. He was also the man who conquered modern cricket first. His career overlapped with overarm and underarm bowling, so a new format would hardly be a blip for him. But he's not here because he can bowl, or even bat. He's here as my franchise player because he's really famous, and I as a T20 guy know that every team must have someone who is just quite famous. Now he did play as an amateur, but he also got paid more than the professionals, and there is a precedent for this in modern T20 leagues, even if many of them have salary caps. Players get promotional fees, often dwarfing their actual playing fees, to sign up. Plus other deals can be worked in, and oh yeah, many teams just cheat the salary cap and no one cares. WG would be up for all of this, and not only that, he was essentially the first sporting brand, and so I would expect him to have the league's name shaved into his beard. WG Grace played cricket to be a legend, turned up in random places because they paid him, received extra money under the table, wasn't available for England selection at all times, and was usually a bigger draw than the match he was in. He was T20 cricket. That's my team. Feel free to disagree with all my choices, and I will disagree with all of yours. If you want to put together your dull historical T20 Star 11, chuck them in the comments or on all the social medias when you share this video. And honestly, I want you to share this video until your fingers look like you've been wicket keeping.